So, hi folks, my name is Greg. I am calling in from the United States. Unfortunately, I can't make it to Europe in person due to a family emergency that I've been dealing with some time now. But just know that I'm sending my love and my fellowship to all of you in Europe, and I hope that you at the conference. The name of my talk is Text and Talk. It's named after a graduate course I took in linguistics when I was in school. But what I'm going to be sort of covering with you today is how we design for chat and voice and what the differences are. Because linguistically, talking over chat in just a text-based format is actually quite different than communicating over voice, and we need to take in different considerations when performing those. When it comes to the way that we would communicate, say, pre-pandemic, where we were still in an office, for example, I might remind you, since time is a bit of a construct right now, that you might have swung by your tech bar in person, perhaps to give maybe to get some advice from someone to get help with your laptop. Here on the screen, we have Astro from Salesforce helping out his other Trailhead buddies with an IT problem, and they're all sort of in person getting that help. Now we live in a digital remote first world where companies are moving to what we're calling at Salesforce a digital IQ, where bots are central to the employee experience. And to get help, chatbots and voice assistants are becoming increasingly prevalent to help businesses scale their customer support. Many teams start with a chatbot and decide to extend to voice or vice versa. But unfortunately, you can't just design for one channel and then extend it to another, expecting the same result in the user experience. Unfortunately, conversation works a little differently over text than over voice. And so across contexts, we have what I've sort of seen as three main sort of distinctions of conversation design. We have text-forward conversation design, where the personality of the chatbot is done via textuality, so maybe manipulating the text in some way, caps, italics, bold, emojis, etc. The chatbot usually takes the first turn. There's a structured content strategy around things like videos and GIFs and multimedia, as well as a menu and a quick reply strategy. We have a voice-forward context whereby the personality might be done via pitch or intonation, or you might show some graphics in a graphical UI. You might have a quick intro and then shorter openings in terms of the beginning of subsequent conversations. Again, maybe a structured content strategy, and then we also have to consider the one breath test. So making sure that the content over voice isn't too long. And then we have a voice-centric experience where there's no graphical UI. You might be calling in for an IVA, an IVR, or maybe some completely phone-based voice assistant where all of the things are happening, but there's no graphical support. And really, designing for voice-only or voice-centric experiences has different affordances and constraints for an optimal user experience. So, for example, the key distinctions would be that there's a critical dependence on natural language processing and natural language understanding, meaning that you're not going to be able to rattle off long menus over a voice-centric experience. You're going to need to collect the intent with strong NLP. There's going to have to be some sort of sound notification that is still present. So users might feel some disconcertment. How do they know that the system is still there or the line is still connected? For example, yesterday, I called in at a hotel to try and get help with figuring out where I was going to give this presentation today. And it was very unnerving because there would be like this, music to put me on hold, and it would come off the music and say, I'm still here. But every time it would come off of the music, I'm like, wait a second. I know you're still here because you're playing music, but every time you come off of the music, you make me think that someone's about to pick up. And so I'd constantly be going back and forth toward the phone. You have to have a strong strategy around how you're notifying the user that the bot is still present. There's a high reliance on and the frequency of conversational repair in voice. So there might be connection issues. You might have incomplete or incoherent utterances that might be going on. All of those things need to essentially, again, rely on conversation repair to be able to, to support this on the fly, as well as supporting multiple speakers talking at once. Now, we don't necessarily have overlapping speech in the same way in text-based or text-centric conversations. Whereas in voice, you'll have this kind of overlap that, again, you need to be able to keep track of where the conversation is and support where that shows up. So in terms of the critical dependence on NLP and NLU, excuse me, the user pain point is that we have a short working memory when it comes to voice-centric interactions, meaning that from a conversation design standpoint, you're really only going to be able to give at most maybe 1 or 2 examples of what the bot can do. So saying like, hey, I can help you with resetting your password and getting some tech support, as opposed to a menu of 4 or 5 items. You're going to want to use open-ended questions, therefore, instead of text-based menus, because the open-ended question will lend itself to being able to seed the conversational floor to the user, to open up an opportunity for them to put in a request. In doing that, that means you are essentially leaning very hard on the NLP and the NLU, meaning that you're going to have to process all of whatever free-form language is going to come from the user in that moment. In terms of the system requirement, you're going to have to be intent-driven rather than menu-based, because again, we are leveraging NLU for this medium. Now, I would play this out loud, but I'm in a room where there's like some background music going on, so I don't want to get anybody confused. I would play the audio, but I'm going to just read out the transcript for you so it's very clear. A poor voice design experience, if we're starting from a chat-based experience where there's a menu, would be if you just translated it completely to voice using a TTS, text-to-speech system. So for example, if you took the menu that we see on the left-hand side of the screen and just read it out loud. Hi, I'm Astro, a digital assistant for Salesforce. I can help you do the following: reset password, request peripheral, request software, do something else. Now, if we think about that, that sounds very much like what we experience in IVR and IVA experiences today. In order to really lean into the linguistic constraints and linguistic needs of a voice-centric experience, you might rephrase it to something like, hi, I'm Astro, a digital assistant for Salesforce. I can help you reset your password or request software. What can I do for you? And now we have that open-ended question where, by giving a couple of examples, we haven't overloaded the user's brain in terms of what they can sort of keep in mind around what the system can do. And then also seed the opening turn to the user and say, hey, so give us an example of what it is that you'd like to have help with. And again, that puts a lot of reliance on the NLP and NLU. So providing 2 examples of what the system can do without the user having to essentially keep all of those examples in their mind helps to reduce the cognitive load. And it also shortens the turn overall. Instead of a 15 seconds rattling off of the menu items, we shorten to about 8 seconds worth of discourse. You also need some sort of sound notification that the user is still present. So for example, like I mentioned, there's this disconcertment if there's a long pause in a voice-centric conversation, and particularly in English. And the only reason why I can speak to this is because it was done as a study in linguistics on North American English, is that a linguist by the name of Anita Pomerantz in 1984 found that the pause of about 1 second in North American English tends to be the threshold before things get awkward. And the reason being is because anything around that or slightly longer tends to be a predictor of some sort of negative thing that is going to come next in the conversation, like a disagreement or a negation or a clarification. We try to move forward in conversation in terms of harmony. It takes less cognitive load to be able to agree with someone in conversation than it is to disagree. So we have to figure out how we're going to mitigate the fact that disagreement means we're not aligned in this conversation, and that potentially puts a strain on our relationship. So that's an idea about why pauses can be kind of, when they're long, like over a second, in American English, can be awkward. And if that's the case with a bot, the user might have a little bit more patience than they would with a human, but not much when we're talking about a second. So we need to be able to put something in there to show that the bot is still present. We could do back channeling. So for example, like, yup, take your time. Those small tokens where if we were having a conversation, I could see you in person. If any of you were nodding or you were like maybe holding your chin or shaking your head, that would give me an idea, even though you're maybe not saying something, about the extent to which you resonate with or do not resonate with what I'm saying. When it comes to the user talking to a voice-centric bot that doesn't have any graphical support, you're going to need that vocal support in order to make sure that the user knows, yes, I got you and I follow you or I don't. And then if the bot needs to take some sort of pause to go gather some information, use a staccato sound to kind of hold the line. You could use music, yes. I think it's a great opportunity to introduce an Easter egg. Like, for example, if I were a conversation designer for Nintendo, I would put my little sort of holding sound as like the Pokemon Center when you're getting your Pokemon healed. Like, wouldn't that be kind of cool, kind of fun, something that the user wouldn't totally expect? But the reason why we pick some sort of staccato sound is because if you use a long sound with no breaks in the sound, you're only going to emphasize the length of the pause to the user. But if you break it up, then it's going to essentially remove the focus on the length of the pause and still communicate to the user that they're there. That said, do not use a typing sound. Because my life is conversation design, I noticed a while back on Twitter that it was a trending topic around the typing sound for when you're talking to IVAs, and that many users found it incredibly disconcerting because they know they're not talking to a person with hands. They're not talking to someone who can actually type. So rather than focusing on the typing sound, it's the staccato that really breaks up that long pause. And so again, you could use a tone that's chopped up. You could use something that is, again, staccatic in nature, but don't use a typing sound. Ellipses in a text-based conversation show that the bot is taking action. And so this is how in a text-based interaction, we know that the bot is doing something. And that's something that just comes in the graphical support. So we don't necessarily have to worry about this in text. But if we were going to take this and convert it into voice, we would have to take into consideration, okay, we need to show that the bot is still, maybe taking a breath or taking a pause or doing something before taking another turn. We'd have to account for the fact that we have to describe the images rather than sending images completely. We have to account for the fact that there's too many words in this, and we have to shorten it. There's also trouble without some sort of sonic indicator. So this is taken from a transcript between a tech help desk and an employee where there's some sort of long pause from the agent, you can see here, and then the employee checks in, hello, and then we get the confirmation, yes, still here. And then there's some overlap, still there, yes, I can hear you, etc. So we know that anything, again, we have 6 seconds here, that's quite long, that's going to cause a user to want to check in. All right. We also have to be able to handle frequent conversation repair. So again, when it comes to conversation repair, this does exist in text. When the bot collects something like an email address and the input is wrong, like you don't have a complete domain name, that we do have repairs for that exists, for example, in many different products. But with voice, ASR is another point where potentially the understanding could fail. Speech exchanges will necessitate much more frequent repair than chat because we're dealing with pronunciation. We're dealing with acoustic phonetics. If you haven't trained the bot to be able to understand, you all are in Edinburgh, Scottish English, that's going to be really challenging because the vowel structure and the acoustics are quite different. There could also be connection issues in addition to the parsing, interruptions, speaking over each other, incomplete utterances. And so the solution would be to reprompt, which many of you in conversation design already know. You are going to want to encourage some sort of rephrasing there. You might think you can just collect the last entity. Systems may ask for some of that. You can't, necessarily just collect the last entity that is, an issue. You can't just say, can you repeat that last piece? What if you need something a little bit earlier? Whereas in text, conversation repair can happen within separate turns at the question level. Voice is going to need to happen within maybe 2 utterances that are spoken in the same turn. So in the Einstein Bot Builder, we have this. This is Salesforce Chat Builder product. You can put this in, and this happens via text. You would need to consider this as well if you were going to connect your Einstein Bot to voice using TTS. You need to also be able to support multiple speakers chatting at once. And so the reason why we don't call this an interruption is because for some speakers, talking at the same time can be considered enthusiasm rather than a power move to steal the conversational floor. So sociolinguist Deborah Tannen from Georgetown University, in her seminal work, Conversational Style, discovered two main styles of conversation: high involvement, whereby talking at the same time is considered to show closeness and engagement, and high considerateness, where talking at the same time is considered a power move. You're trying to steal the conversational floor from me. Not all interruptions or overlapping speech are considered the same. So we need to be able to consider, if you have a customer on the other line who is a high involvement speaker, they might overlap at the same time as the bot, and that should not be problematic. But if there's an issue with the TTS, we need to make sure that we can handle that. So that's where repair becomes appropriate, or determine the transition depending on the type of bargain. So for example, if the user expresses confusion, what I mean is, or by that I meant. If the user complains, I'm sorry. Or if the user explains something, got it. Or if the user preemptively answers a question, because a lot of times you might get something like, hi, I'm calling in because I need help with X, Y, and Z, before the bot can ask what you need help with. You need to be able to confirm that. So listen to and understand when there is overlap, or if there's some sort of barge in, to respond with a relevant next utterance. So overlapping repair doesn't necessarily happen as much in chat. We have repair, but because the lines are graphically shown in succession, you're not going to see that at the same time. You might get messages that are sent at the same time, but the graphical UI organizes the chat in succession. This causes the repair to take place within discrete separate turns rather than at the same time. Whereas in overlapping speech, this happens quite frequently. There's no graphical UI to essentially force that succession. So again, these are the 4 reasons why text and voice are not the same. You can't just design for one channel and deploy everywhere, because it's not going to work. You have to take into consideration the linguistic constraints of each channel and tweak your designs enough to be able to properly support a strong user experience for both. Thank you. Now I'm going to move over to questions. Okay. What is the advantage of using voice bots and not text-based bots in chat apps? I'm not totally sure what you might mean by that question, in the sense that if you have a chat-based app and you have a voice input option, if that's what you're talking about, then the advantage of that is that having that multimodal support really allows for the experience to extend to multiple users. It becomes an accessibility affordance. So let's say, for example, your user is non-sighted, they're blind, they cannot see the screen, and they're using a screen reader. Then having a voice bot allows them to be able to have a natural conversation in situ of your text-based app. So I would say that's one of the main advantages of that. And if there are no other questions, then I think I'm at time. I hope everyone got something out of this this talk. My contact information is on the screen if you need to reach me. Happy to connect via email or LinkedIn. And I hope you all have a safe, wonderful conference. Thank you so much.